Alright, picture the scene. So you've just clocked into your morning shift on a cold Tuesday morning where you're feeling a little bit sleep deprived, and for whatever reason, your boss is in a very happy mood. He proceeds to engage in a bit of small talk right before your shift begins, and he rolls out some of the deadest jokes that you've ever heard in your life. And you try to be polite by fake laughing through it, but there's only so many jokes that you can go through before you have to just drop the act and take off the mask. But that's the thing, you're not really supposed to do that, because if you do let your intrusive thoughts win, then there's a chance that you probably get fired. And it just begs the question, is everyone around you putting on an act, wearing a mask, just performing and following a script? What are we performing for exactly? And I will admit, it is a bit of a different way to think about life, because if this is true, which I do think it is partially true, then how much of the people around us do we truly know? And how much is our quote-unquote act is predetermined, if that makes any sense? Okay, just to give a bit of context onto that last point, let's talk about the conventional life script that you and me are probably following to some extent. So you go to school because that's what society and parents encourage you to do. You go to university because that's what you're told to get a good job. And why get a good job? You get a job because you realize your survival and what you want out of life, it requires money. Sure, you're maybe in your early 20s, say you're 21 for example, and you're living your quote-unquote best life, and everyone around you is telling you, you got all the time in the world, mate. Until you hit around 25, and that entire script just flips on its head, where everyone is on your back, asking you, when are you going to get your life sorted out? Because you're an adult now. And a couple more years go by until you hit a midlife crisis and you see your peers around you starting to settle down and getting married. So to try and not get left behind, you also settle down and follow suit, probably due to societal and family pressures. You get a mortgage and pop out a couple of kids so that they can go to school and follow the same script that you have been following for the past 20 or 30 years. Then you get old until death happens and the cycle continues. And by the way, there's nothing inherently wrong with following this particular life script, because I'm probably going to go through this sort of life script myself. But it's just like, who actually wrote the script, man? It's also the way that as a collective, we've all subconsciously agreed that this is the standard way to live a human existence. In fact, there's a phrase from Shakespeare I'm going to quote right now, which is the fact that all the world's a stage, which basically suggests that at such a young age, we're all conditioned to perform and develop this sort of social awareness on how we should act in front of other people. This is even more relevant now with the advent of social media within the past decade or so, where we're in a sense performing an act on our screens and we're watching other people's performances play out. And interestingly enough, these screen performances are how we end up meeting new people and forming relationships nowadays, from online dating to remote working and staying in touch with family. Even in real life, we all have a tendency to play a performance, almost like different versions of ourselves, if you will, in different social situations. And we tend to keep our quote-unquote backstage selves a bit more private. And this concept I'll be going into more into detail was popularized by Goffman, who was a famous sociologist in the 1900s. Now, this isn't to say that we're being inauthentic or anything, but whether you consciously realize it or not, we end up tweaking our personalities so that we can match the vibe of the social setting that we're in. This is why you may be liberal in your speech with your closest mates, as you end up just saying the most outlandish stuff, which probably should be kept in a boys group chat. Whereas you may be a bit more conservative in your speech with your closest family and friends that you haven't met up in a long time. So it absolutely matters the type of script that you're following, given the target audience that you're performing in front of, if that makes sense. And we can group the front that we put in into two categories: the front region and the back region. Front regions are where we subconsciously know that it's in our best interest to present the best versions of ourselves. This is especially true when you're in work, where you have to give off the impression that you're busy when your supervisor is around, and you have to be in character the whole time. And you do this regardless of how you feel about your job or task at hand, to minimize the risk of getting fired from your job and maintain that steady stream of income hitting your bank account every single month for you to live life. On the other hand, back regions are essentially where you can quote-unquote let your guard down a little bit. In the context of you being in work again, your back region may be you going to the toilet or engaging in a little bit of gossip with your colleague whilst the supervisor isn't watching. This is where you as a worker can relax a little bit and engage in potentially out of character behavior. And these front and back regions aren't necessarily physical locations, but it's rather more situational. But of course, these regions I'm talking about can overlay in physical locations to some extent, like being totally relaxed in privacy versus being under constant surveillance and the psychological implications of that. Another way that we can describe these regions is individuals having this mask that they can take on and off to give the impression to look good in front of other people. And this is the mask of morality. The thing is, we all have a tendency to appear moral in front of others, not necessarily for the good of other people, but rather for our own selfish needs. So to be socially accepted for our own benefit, we tend to gravitate towards what society deems as what is moral and what isn't, which in a lot of cases isn't even objective, by the way. Because if you as an individual decide to go against the grain, against the script, against modern morality, this world will try everything in its power to cancel and reject you. It's the reason why certain things people would say without ill intent around 10 years ago would be cancelled today simply because society decided so. And I'm sure you can think of a couple of examples that this has happened to for certain YouTubers or celebrities. This implies that it's impossible to see the world for what it truly is, because we're essentially strangers to one another, because we truly don't know who someone is, because we end up hiding who we are to other people. This is why, say, if an individual decided to take off his mask, he would actually have a very hard time putting it back on and having the same effect. Because it's almost like an actor breaking character. And even before the mask of morality came into existence, so I'm talking about caveman times here, there's a certain mask that humans still put on, and it's one that's very ingrained into nature itself, which is the mask of power. More specifically, I'm talking about the will to power, which was popularized by the famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And a lot of the times we mask this animalistic instinct within us with this mask of morality, which leads to a lot of people living lives that they don't truly desire. It's the reason why a lot of people, and men especially, have this almost nihilistic viewpoint of life at the moment. And more specifically, the set of morality and white lies which is spread through society in the postmodern era. And even if you look through history, all you stumble across is more lies. Because when me and you are reading, say, a history book, we're thinking that, okay, the information in this book must be objective, right? Well, that's simply not true, because every time you read a historian's book, it's written from his subjective viewpoint. Because think about it like this, right? Every historic war and event that has happened are written by winners, and the losers get the short end of the stick and write absolutely nothing. So as any quote-unquote winner would do, they would skew the story to make themselves look like the good guy. So throughout this whole video, I've basically explained how fake and scripted life really is, even before you're even born. And you probably feel some type of way about this. Maybe you feel like you have a lack of control over your life. But I'm here to tell you that we've got a lot more in control than we've realized. Because number one, you've watched this video and you now know what's happening behind the scenes. And number two is that if we admit to ourselves that we actually do have control over our lives, this implies that we can actually change the situation that we're in right now. And the best way to break out of our predetermined script is by regaining our independence and authenticity. I typically don't give advice like this since I'm also figuring things out. But I feel like this piece of advice has helped me immensely in my own life right now. So you would do this by going through a test or being purpose driven on something that you're only doing for yourself and not for any sort of social acceptance or being dependent on other people. This is purely so that you can preserve your sense of self and remain authentic. So as you can imagine, this is for the most part going to be taking place in privacy and solitude. The thing is, this is where most people end up messing up because they quit. And it's for one simple reason only, which is there isn't actually a clear roadmap on what you should be doing as an individual in your own life. This means that most people would not bother actually going inwards and going through that journey, but rather following the conventional predetermined script that's been laid out for them, simply because it's comfortable. And you'd see this in the majority of people, as most people would end up doing something because of an external reward or via external motivation. And this is where individuals can see themselves get trapped in this sort of quote-unquote rat race. And to that I say nah. Regardless of whether you get a reward or not at the end, it shouldn't matter and it shouldn't faze you. This is where you're going to feel one of the best human emotions that you can ever feel, which is joy. Because you're following your own life script with your own rules. And now this doesn't mean that you become a complete hermit, but if you do decide to re-enter into society, you'd become such a valuable asset to the world where you can actually bring something to the table. Now, I don't know what that looks like for you, but all I'm saying is we've only got one shot at this thing called life. Feel free to check out the 2 videos up on screen, and I appreciate you watching.